over the decades, despite the fact that the government and business leaders, including Exxon and other large fossil fuel companies, knew very well the science that the carbon emissions over time were going to cause this gradual warming in our atmosphere. And instead of acting and supporting action, where we could have done a gradual transition in jobs in the energy industry from the fossil fuels to alternative energy sources. I so wanted some kind of Pearl Harbor, as bad as it sounds, some kind of Pearl Harbor sort of event. We just had the anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor. That galvanized the United States to enter into World War II. It began an intense period of mobilization. The United States industry and the United States citizens stepped up, and they did tremendous things, amazing things during that time period. And I so have wanted to see some sort of watershed event. I don't want a catastrophe, but it looks like that we need some kind of catastrophe to wake people up to the threat they face, because they're not seeing it. And they're looking around at the rest of us U.S. citizens, and they're not seeing us acting as though there's an emergency, which is a big part, I think, of the psychology. It's hard for people to believe that there really is an emergency when they get up in the morning, the birds are singing, the sun's shining, maybe the weather's even a little nicer for those of us that live in the more temperate climates than it's been before, and they don't understand the threat that we face. And so, based on where we are, based on the fact that we haven't gotten the action we needed out of the global climate conferences, based on less and less certainty that we're going to get the action we need from leaders in the U.S. and in the world, we think that something more is necessary. It's not that direct action, that civil disobedience is the only kind of work that's needed, but the people that have been laboring ceaselessly. Jeff set up a meeting with Steve Running, a longtime member of the IPCC who's been researching this stuff, who knows the facts inside and out. He knows the threat that we face. And his work is so important. The work that so many of you do here in Missoula, the work that Jeff does with Wilderness Watch, the work people are doing on alternative energy technology, the work people are doing on energy conservation, net zero houses, that kind of stuff. It's all such important work, but there's so much of an obstacle that's put up by the money and power of the fossil fuel industry. And, the motivation of those profits and the whole structure of the corporate capitalist system is to put profit above all else. And we're running out of the time period when we can allow that to happen. And so for those of us that are called to do the work, we feel it's really important to actually put ourselves in the way of the harm, in the way that other social movements have done that. In women's suffrage, in civil rights, people were willing to put their own lives at jeopardy because of how important these principles were. Most recently, we saw the folks at Standing Rock, and they are approaching this conflict with prayer and with just an amazing amount of inner strength. It's been, I don't think their stance has been perfect. I think there's some of their people, for instance, on a police line that are being adversarial with those law enforcement officers. But the elders of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe have time and time again pulled those people back and reinforced the attitude of prayer the attitude of nonviolence, really looking at the Morton County Sheriff's Department and at the National Guard and other sheriff departments that were called in as being as caught in this system that we're in as everyone else. And I think it's that willingness to be vulnerable and actually suffer harm at the hands of that oppression or that exploitation that really turns public opinion. And so that we're trying to draw on that power, the empathy that happens when people see the extent that industry and government and law enforcement will go to quash people's well-being. And so that's the reason that we took the action. We looked at it as the beginning of perhaps a year-long journey. Part of the benefit that it definitely doesn't feel that way for me, but part of the benefit is going around the country and talking to groups and trying to get the message out that we truly have an emergency, and that rank and file, I forget where's Jeff sitting? What was the term? The everyman. That regular, everyday kinds of people that would have never thought of taking this kind of risk, would have never thought of putting themselves out there like that, are seeing that not only is it something that they should do, they're seeing it as an obligation, a duty, a responsibility, and that's the way I see it. If someone were threatening my child in an immediate sense, I would step between my child and the perpetrator of that harm. The same way with other family members, the same way with my community. And so I think it's an American value. It's one of the things, I talked to Jeff about this, one of the things that came out in the fossil fuel industry comments on this action was to call us eco-terrorists. And the truth is that at this point in time, it's the fossil fuel companies that are the eco-terrorists. They are the ones that are continuing these harmful actions that threaten all of our lives. And to me, that's the definition of eco-terrorism. They're killing the ecological systems that support our lives. And so anyway, I didn't want to spend too much time talking myself. It's something I do because I have to. I'm more interested in pulling a chair up and kind of talking about things. One thing I can close with, though, is what we're picturing this year-long journey will look like. So I had my arraignment where my charges were read yesterday, and the judge read the possible maximum penalties for it, and they'll be moving on to set a trial date. I've requested a jury trial. I'll be presenting the necessity defense, which basically is what I've been talking about. If you walked by your neighbor's house, you saw that there was a fire in the house and that his child was trapped inside, and you broke down his front door to rescue that child, that breaking and entering and destruction of property would be excused by the court. It was a necessity to prevent a greater harm. And that's what the necessity defense is. So when we shut down safety valves on 5 pipelines carrying tar sands oil from Alberta, Canada into the U.S., we were putting ourselves in the way of harm. That tar sands oil, as sure as a fire in a house threatens a child trapped in that house, threatens our lives. It threatens lives at the point of extraction. It's such a dirty process, and we only have so much clean water and soil in our world. And the hydraulic fracturing process just is such an incredibly dirty, toxic, polluting process. From there, the transporting You've seen the oil train explosions, you've seen the pipeline leaks and the pipeline ruptures, and then at the point of burning it, we're releasing, that's the dirtiest source, coal and tar sands oil are the dirtiest combustible fossil fuels that we have that release the most emissions. Finally, there's what I was describing earlier, there's that gradual reduction of the use of fossil fuels that had we begun it, even 5 years ago, but especially 10 years ago, our downward slope in the use of fossil fuels could have been quite gradual and could have been quite job preserving, could have been quite economy preserving. And the longer we wait, the steeper that drop needs to be. Those 5 pipelines represented only 15% of the total use of oil in the United States. And so that's not even natural gas or coal, it's just oil use. And if we wrote a letter to President Obama at the same time we did the action, we asked him to use his executive powers to keep those pipelines shut down permanently. If we could have done that, that would have been enough to meet the reductions needed to meet this steeper glide path for this year, for 2016 and part of 2017. But at this point in time, it wouldn't take us all the way through 2017. We'd need to come up with about another 10% of reduction next year. And that, there are so many of us that know that we need to do that, and yet it's just not happening.